Okay, so what we're going to ask you to have a look at this week is what's called concept and dialogue maps. You've had a kind of a first go with the exercise from last week, where you were asked to try and take an aspect of something that you want to teach and try and sort of get the structure of that thing down on paper. But what I want to do with you this week is take that idea and push it a little bit further forwards. And the reason we're doing this at this point on the course is because at the beginning of Module 2, what we're going to start looking at is a whole load of ideas called constructivist or socio-constructivist approaches to teaching and learning. And they're really to do with the fact that as we learn something, what we do is we build it up into what's called a knowledge object or a schema in our heads. So we get a real kind of construction, and the reason it's called a construct, of course, is because literally we have to build it for ourselves through what we read, through kind of input, but also through our own experience and reflection on our experience. Yeah. So we're looking at these things that we have inside our heads, which we construct, and what we're really going to be working towards is thinking about how do we help our students construct these for themselves in their own way. But I think before you're able to really do that to a high level, actually you need to do two things first. You need to understand what a mental construct really is by identifying and working with one of your own, so you really understand how it works and how it's put together. And then the second thing that we need to understand is how we came to acquire our own construct. How did we build our own? Because once we understand those things, then we're in a good position to think about, well, how can we help our students build and acquire theirs? So I think what we're going to try and do, what would be a good thing to try and do, is to produce what I call concept and dialogue, what are called concept and dialogue maps of an area that we want to teach or that we're interested in. And these are good because they're rather they go a bit further than the sort of the mind maps that people do in the first week. So it's like we'll do mind maps in the first week, which you've already done, and then we're going to take it and we're going to push it further with concept and dialogue maps. They don't look particularly different in some ways from mind maps structurally, but they require you to think, I think, rather more. And I know that many people, when they first do their mind map of the area they want to teach, or they have a first go at looking at their so-called mental construct, it's generally a bit unsatisfying, and it's unsatisfying because you do have to do these things a few times round. It takes a few drafts to get this right, okay? So, as I say, what we're going to try and do is get this knowledge, and we'll have a high level of tacit knowledge. It's not that any of us don't know the fields we teach, we do, but it's just how conscious are we of that knowing. So we get that tacit knowledge out of our heads and make it visible both to ourselves and to other people. So before I kind of talk in general about how you do a concept and dialogue map, I'm going to go straight in and show you an example, right? Because what we're trying to do with these maps is identify the main themes or areas or ideas and show how they link and what is the nature of the link between them. And interestingly, this whole idea of doing it in this particular way, through concept and dialogue, was originally dreamed up as a way of doing some formative assessment with students during a course, because what this is really good for is showing you how somebody is thinking about a particular topic or area. So it's not what are they thinking, it's not what do they know, it's not a list of facts, it's really showing you how somebody is beginning to put something together in their head. And it's useful because you can see what they've linked, what they haven't linked, what the missing links are, have they made any links that are incorrect, are any bits of a kind of the logical chain missing or in the wrong place. And it's a really useful thing as a teacher just to see how your student is thinking about something. So I'm going to show you a little example from a 10-week history course on the subject of the British Empire. And the first one, this one here, was made by the students end of week 3, beginning of week 4. So they're about a third of the way into the course, and you can see what they've done. They've had a really good go. They've got the idea of British Empire's right there in the middle. Around the outside, they've got a whole load of concepts that in their mind relate or are part of the British Empire. So it was mercantile, it was based on trade, people were seeking glory, it was there for protection. Many of the territories that were ruled by the British Empire already had their own populations. So all of those things, they've got these ideas. But you can tell that this is a construction which is not yet finished in two ways. One is that everything's very just kind of linked to the centre, so it's not well integrated yet. There are some lines going from different topics around the outside to each other, but by and large, most of this comes into and goes out from the centre. So what you've got here is not a fully formed mental construct. What you've got is what's called a knowledge ensemble. And a knowledge ensemble is when you basically know what all the main elements are in something, but they're still quite loosely connected to each other. They're not really tied up. One of the things that you see as a major difference between a novice and an expert mental construct of something is that the expert's construct is always much more integrated, and basically everything in different ways and sophisticated ways links to everything else. With a novice, things are much more loosely linked, and you can see that here, it's quite loosely linked. Yeah, you'll also see that the labels on the lines, and this is what makes it a dialogue concept and dialogue map, not just a mind map. On a mind map, you just draw lines between things. Yeah, on a concept and dialogue map, you have to explain what the line represents, because the line might represent different things. But you'll see here that very often the lines are was, bought, ruled. They're quite, I mean, the one on the left-hand side between merchants and population of territories traded, that's a bit more specific, but going right from British Empire was mercantile. That's not telling you very much, it's just kind of suggesting that, you know, this is just a descriptive label. So they haven't really worked out what the links are in any great detail yet. Compare that with this. So this is now in week 8 of the course, and you can see somebody's understanding of this topic has really come along, because you've got it's a much more integrated map. Things are much more linked around the edge of the map and to each other. It's not just all linked through the centre, and you can see that the words that have been put on the links, things like conflicts with, founded by, in competition with, initially perused largely by, trade and compete with, initially founded by. They're much can conflict. They're much more precise, kind of thoughtful things, which and the links themselves really do link things. They don't just say this was that. Well, this was in conflict with that. That shows a much deeper level of understanding about the relationship between different items. So that's what you've got. You've got a much more integrated kind of map. And I think, you know, if you look at that first one, that's probably the sort of level of the thing that most people do the first week we ask them to do it. And okay, you haven't done it as a concept and dialogue map. You've done it as a, you know, as a mind map. But generally, the first time people do these things, or the first couple of drafts, tend to be fairly loose, because it's hard. You know, it's quite challenging getting this stuff out of our heads and really figuring out what we know about something and how we know it. And what we're going to try and do this week is move towards something which is much more like this, where you have a second go, you come back to it, you revisit it, you rethink it, and you come up with something, hopefully, that's much more integrated, where there's a lot more connection between different elements, and we're very precise about what the nature of those connections are. And again, you know, this will take you several drafts, right? So the basic rules, having seen those examples, the basic rules are like this. In a way, there isn't a single right way or wrong ways. You know, it's just about getting our knowledge out of our heads and onto paper. But the key thing is structure. The more structure there is, the better it's going to be. As I said, you will need several goes, and every time you develop it, you will find it becomes more complex. And typically, what happens is those networks will become more integrated, and the labels will become more precise on the lines. And you do need those three elements. You need content, structure, and labelled links, because the labelled links put the content boxes into dialogue with each other, and that's how you get the content and the dialogue. Yeah. Just to give you one more example, because it would be something that you've experienced, just very quickly, because I could witter about this for hours, which I'm not going to. This would be the map I produced, because I thought, well, I should really have a go at this myself, around developing as a teacher. So that's my key concept, you know, teaching on the PG Cert. How do I develop as a teacher? How do I help other people develop as a teacher? This, what you're about to see, this was basically my third go. I did 2 drafts on paper. Lots of scribbling out. I left a couple of days between each one, because I think you have to do it, go away from it, come back to it, you see it afresh, and have another go. But I did find that doing the final draft on a slide was actually quite helpful to me, because you can move things around on a slide and jiggle them about in a way that you can't on paper. So I found that the brainstorming sort of phase, for me at least, I mean it might not be the same for you, but for me at least, the brainstorming kind of creative phase worked well on paper, lots of different coloured inks and pens and big sheets of flip chart and all that malarkey. But editing it and producing the final thing, I found worked well electronically. So anyway, so developing as a teacher. And the first thing I say is that I think there are 3 main elements there. So reading from the top to the bottom, I need to have my subject knowledge, understanding and skills. So I need to really know the content of the field that I'm teaching. I used to teach English Lit, I had to know the English Lit stuff. I now teach education, I've got to know the education stuff. And at the bottom, pedagogical knowledge, understanding and skills. Well, you know, I need to know in general terms how to teach. It's no good knowing about education if I don't know how to teach. It's no good knowing about English literature if I don't know how to teach. And what links and bridges those two things, I'm not going to talk my way through all the links, because that would take forever, and you can see them on the page as they appear. Is subject pedagogy. And subject pedagogy is all about, well, you know, what are good ways of teaching this particular thing. So the pedagogy is what are good ways of teaching and learning in general. Subject pedagogy is more specific. It's like, well, what are good ways of teaching, say, key signatures? You know, there's loads of different ways you can teach key signatures, but which ways tend to be most effective and why? So it's kind of honing down the teaching of a particular area. And then there's another way of bridging those things over there. Then coming into the middle, I would say that there are a whole load of kind of emotional skills and soft skills, so the affective knowledge and the process knowledge. The affective knowledge is the emotional stuff. Process knowledge is just to do with, you know, knowing how to be alongside a group, knowing how a group develops, helping people through time rather than just in a particular moment. And I think those then lead to me having to think about, well, I'm not quite sure now looking at it that balance is the right word. I think it's more like a spectrum, really, of facilitation and instruction that I need to be able to move up and down in an appropriate way at an appropriate time. So what I think you begin to find quite often on these maps is when they get integrated is that you end up with kind of circuits. So I think that's a fairly integrated circuit there, and everything's connected to everything else. So it's one circuit coming out of developing as a teacher. And there we are, those are the final links that go in there, right? But then for me there's another circuit that comes out of developing as a teacher, and that's kind of just the general developmental process, and you'll see that's a very Kolbian process. You know, you have some practice, you reflect on it, you get feedback from other people, you try and become more informed by maybe going and doing some reading of the literature or talking to other people about how they do it, and then you plan what you're going to do next. So it's quite a Kolbian cycle. So that's another cycle coming out of developing as a teacher. We've got the cycle to the right, the cycle above, and again that developmental process works for all the elements of the cycle to the right, so that integrates nicely. And then we've got how do I choose what I need to work on for my development, because, you know, I might pick the wrong things. That developmental process is fine, but I need to know what are the right things to develop, and that then comes through you know, using evaluation and reflection and getting information and data in from my students, my peer, progression and achievement data, and again that then links both formally and informally to the developmental process itself and informs what areas I need to develop on. So that was my attempt at writing it, and the thing is, yeah, I think you have to get it at the right sort of level. I mean, you can go into much more detail than that, and in my mind each of those boxes could then kind of explode into its own concept and dialogue map. So I think it's about trying to get a sufficiently high level kind of amount of detail so that it doesn't become overly crowded, but enough that you can then really integrate it. So that's what we're going to try and achieve this week. We're going to try and look at creating for each of us, for our own area, something along these kind of lines. A nicely integrated subject and concept and dialogue map, because that will then really help us move into looking at the whole way of constructivist, social constructivist teaching, and helping our students build their own maps up as well, and also making sure that we're aware of what their maps are, so that if by error at any point they put, you know, something in which is a mistake, we can spot that soon enough that they then don't try and build a whole edifice on top of something which is actually wrong, because unpicking and going all the way back to the point where the error came in, as we know, that can be a remarkably difficult thing to do. I'll put the rest of the instructions up on the blog, and I'd be interested to get feedback as well about how you found these voiced over slides, because I've never done them before, and it struck me that it might be helpful for you at this point. So be interested to know whether you found them helpful, not helpful, or just, you know, just listen to me wittering for 10 minutes or whatever it is. So feedback on that would be great. Okay, and good luck. I hope to see you all soon, and take care. That's it. Bye.